I was so thankful for that sense of purpose. And so a few days ago, I was in that part of town driving by there, and I've been teaching this kind of stuff for a while now. And when I got by there, I asked myself the story as I drove by that plaza. As I drove by that plaza that was there 40-something years ago, I asked myself this question: does my story still stir me? And thank God it does. To experience renewal, it has to happen in the heart of the leader. Now, what happens to us because we're human, the challenge is we're doing supernatural ministry in a natural body. I hate that. If I didn't have this natural body, I could do this all the time, 24 hours a day. Nobody would come, but I could do it. Now watch this. I've heard, and I've probably been guilty of this, and when you're growing up in a Pentecostal culture, we get caught up in the emotion. Now here's what happens. The anointing can produce emotion, but emotion is not necessarily the anointing. I rocked some of you's world right there. I'm sorry. Because here's what I've done. As a result of having a sense of the anointing, it stirred my emotion, and I've said stupid stuff. Now, when I was unwise, I blamed the stupid stuff on God. I knew it'd get quiet right here, but I won't make you think. See, good teaching is not what they tell you, it's how they make you think. But, so the anointing can produce emotion, but all emotion is not necessarily the anointing. And I've heard people say, bless God, I don't want to rust out, I want to burn out. The problem with that is either way you're out. So now listen, I'm leading into something really important. Listen to me. God don't want you out, He wants you to finish. Okay, I know I'm going to be in trouble with my time already. It's 10:30. The first break's supposed to be at 10:45, but I want to go on record and saying I didn't get to the pulpit till 10:15. Just so you know, okay? No excuses, just fact, all right? So here we go. Watch this. So what happens is, in our humanness, if we don't know how to steward who we are as a person, we can't finish God's purpose for our life. You remember the story of Elijah in the Old Testament, prayed a 63-word prayer. Fire came from heaven, and he defeated the prophets of Baal. And then Jezebel threatened him, and he began to run. Listen, when I was pastoring, there were 3 sermon series that I did that were the most popular, and 25, 30 years later, I can tell you what they are. You may not be curious, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The 3 that I remember that were the most popular had to do with anger. The second one was how to affair-proof your marriage. And the third one was what to do when you want to die. About depression. It was about Elijah. This great prophet of God who prayed down fire from heaven got so discouraged that he wanted to die. And if you'll read that story in the Old Testament, you'll notice the first thing that God did was not preach to him, but he let him rest, and then he fed him. I was preaching and teaching about this kind of thing I'm about to get into. I was in a southern state, and several months before I went back to that state to preach for a pastor. I'm walking out of the restaurant after Sunday lunch, and there's this guy just staring at me. It was so strange that it made me feel compelled, because I'm thinking, either they know me or they're a stalker. I mean, staring at me so intently. And so I just said, I must look like somebody you know. To which he said, are you Bishop Corder? And I said, well, you do know me. And here's why I'm telling you the story, because I want to lead into this. Because what I'm about to say doesn't sound spiritual, but the truth is, it's a stewarding of your body I'm going to talk about. As a pastor, ministerial burnout is at an all-time high. More people are leaving the ministry today than any time in the history that we've kept records of it. Okay? Since 2017, there has been almost a 15% increase of people who are experiencing pastoral burnout. Okay? So I said to him, I said, you must know me. He said, yeah. He said, you were in a state meeting and you spoke that day and you saved my life. His wife was with him and she said, you didn't just save his life, you saved our marriage. Now that don't happen to me all the time, so I was immediately curious to say, okay, my Lord, what did I say? I need to say that again. And what I said was what I'm about to tell you. I talked about one of the things for personal renewal is, I'm going to give you 5 things, okay? And they're not on your handout. And I've gotten old enough now that I'm not making mandates, I'm making suggestions. Okay, before I had children, I preached about here's how you raise kids. And after I had 2, I said, I'm not sure, but here's some thoughts. So this isn't on the handout, but I'm going to give you 5 things. If you're going to personal renewal, number 1, you have to remember your calling. This is why you got into ministry in the first place. For some of you, when you accepted the call to ministry, it literally changed the entire direction of your life. I remember I had went to work for a company. I'd gotten out of high school early, and I went to work for a company. I was the youngest person they ever hired in the history of the company. And the agreement was, I lived in Chattanooga, the agreement was I'd work 6 months in Chattanooga, then they'd transfer me to Birmingham. Well, somewhere in that 6-month period, I felt this call to preach. And it just so happened I worked with a man who went to a Church of God. I was Church of God, but he went to a Church of God, and he was really a Baptist guy. His wife was really Church of God. Good man, biggest givers in the church. Small country church, as a matter of fact, when you went to the church, honest to goodness, when you pull off the interstate to go to their church, there's not a red light, there's not even a stop sign, there's not a grocery store, there is nothing but the church and a few houses. Literally. The whole church was about 1/3 of the size of this congregation. So, because his wife was the clerk, he's a good man. They were the biggest givers, whatever other reason. The pastor asked him to be in charge of Pastor Appreciation Day. And so we had worked together in this company that I went to work for. And he knew, because we had talked, we'd travel, and when you travel, you talk. And I told him about feeling called to preach. And so he said, hey, we're having Pastor Appreciation Day. And I told my pastor, you're going to preach. Now, he's the kind of guy, he didn't ask me if I was going to. He told me I was going to. So sure enough, here's where I preached my first sermon 45 years ago, the 3rd Sunday in April. I preached in this little old country church. There was nothing else on that exit. Literally, the church was really, really small. 45 years ago, I'm not making this up, they gave their pastor a new Ford LTD car and 100 gallons of gas. Now here's the truth. They didn't give a rip about what I had to say that morning. They don't remember it. They wanted to see their pastor get that new car. Now, back in those days, we had Sunday night service. They don't do that everywhere now, but in those days they did. And so he said, I want you to just come back and preach tonight. Well, I did, and lo and behold, in that little old country church, 3 people got saved. And then the pastor came to me and said, why don't you preach a revival through Wednesday? And I said, okay. What he didn't know is I only had 2 sermons. They'd heard both of them. True story. True story. Now, here's what I'm telling you my story. Here's what I know. You have a story. You have a story. That changed my life. I went from working for this company, going to be transferred to Birmingham, Alabama, going to do a certain thing vocationally. When I accepted the call of God, it changed the direction and ultimately the destiny of my life. And so when I had to sometimes remember my calling, why I'm in the ministry. This is not my vocation. This is not how I make a living. This is my calling. Here's the difference between a vocation and a calling. A vocation is what you get paid for. A calling is what you are created for.
That's true. That's true. Isaac, that is true.
So listen, this is my calling. This is what I'm created for. This is my purpose for living. This changed the direction and destiny of my entire life. And if you're going to experience personal renewal, sometimes you have to go back and remember your calling. Second of all, you have to rest your body, your mind, and your spirit. Let me make 3 suggestions to you. I try to say it in simple terms so you can remember it. So here's how it's said. Number 1, you need to divert daily. That means sometime during the day to take a break. We call it a coffee break. Just take a break. When I was the overseer of Kansas, there was a beautiful Catholic church in town in Wichita where the state office was. Back in those days, they could left it unlocked. Nobody went to it. So I would just drive to the Catholic church and sit in that beautiful sanctuary and just be alone with me and God. Okay? So every day, if we're going to experience renewal, we got to divert daily. We have to withdraw weekly. What that means is take a day off. Now, I'm going to say something that you may never ask me to come back again, because I've tried to find a nice way to say it, and I just can't. So I'm just going to say it, okay? And remember, if you don't like it, I'm leaving in a few days, okay? Next year, they'll have a nice guy here. So watch this. If your leadership and ministry style is such that you can't take a day off, you're doing it wrong. I'm sorry. Because the ideal of a Sabbath was not my ideal, it's God's idea. Okay? Don't get mad at me. I can preach it easier than I can do it. But I got to divert daily, I got to withdraw weekly. Now, I'm going to tell you this, I have to abandon annually. Vacation. Now, when I told you, when I grew up, we were poor. In my entire life, before I got married, I never remember taking a vacation. Ever. We didn't have any money. My dad's ideal of a vacation is after you got home from work, come and lay on the couch till he had to go to bed. I'm not making fun of him, that's it. I married a woman, I remember my ministry to her was to rescue her. And I married a woman who grew up every year of her life, she took a vacation. Don't you hate it when opposites attract? And so what happened is, immediately, honest to goodness, immediately that was a challenge for us. And I have a few regrets in my life looking back over 4+ decades. One of those regrets is this. Very often, I had my priorities wrong. Very often, my priority was this. God, ministry, family. And you hear me, you may not like it, you may not agree with it, but it's the truth. Boy, I'm sounding rough today, aren't I? And I have actually had caffeine this morning. Just think how bad it would be. When I was overseer in Tennessee, I got to do a lot of committee work because I was close. And one day, they were having a second meeting on the committee I was on, and the girl that wrote the letter put a sticky note on it and said, "Please eat breakfast before you come." Hey, true story. True story. I don't want to sound harsh. But I know this. Rest is key to renewal.